if I run a very successful roofing company in the whole like suburb region of Vancouver called the Fraser Valley, everyone knows about us here. We're growing. We are very profitable. We're making good money. We've got some stuff standardized, but we put roofs on houses just like everybody else does, right? And so, I could be thinking, hey, surely this business could be super franchisable, right? It makes good money. Everyone around here knows us. We've got a really good team of roofers and production managers and sales managers and all this stuff. We should grow by franchising. Why made that, like, what are some fallacies in my thinking here?
Number one fallacy, and I could spend a lot of time on the fallacies, but the number one is that because you make money, one of your franchisees can make money. That's a completely different scenario. You running a business, being able to make money, or having somebody who's a franchisee, a licensee of your system, can they make money? Remember, number one thing you can't do, as I tell everyone, you can't franchise yourself. When a franchisor calls me up, they're mad and they say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. That's irrelevant how you would have done it. How does the system say you're going to do it? Number one thing I like to tell people who are looking at franchising their business is, one, is your own business profitable? That's something. Now go away and do two models, two business plans. One of a prospective franchisee. How are they going to make money in your business? One of yourself. How are you going to make money? Then look at your prospective franchisee and say, well, that prospective franchisee could start an independent business. Why are they going to come with you? Why are they going to pay you a royalty? Why are they going to pay you other fees? Because you have to have a value-added matrix that says you get all these things. So for example, let's pick on the roofing business for a minute. I've seen this in sub-business. If you are your business, you make all your own shingles, and you're able to get shingles because of that to your franchisee for 25% less than anywhere else they could get them, bingo, there's your reason.
Totally.
Right? That's just one. It's only an example. Another one could be, well, yeah, you could go independent. Good luck finding roofers to work for you. But we have this super way of locating roofers that you'll never be able to get to because we have this big pool and we allow them to move and do various things. Here's another value.
But you've set up that whole infrastructure. It exists. It's very real. It's proven. Yeah. This is such a good point, Blair, because that is very different than saying, well, we do really good job at roofing, is scaling a roofing business, because inherently there's nothing proprietary or special in that, I think, from a value proposition perspective, unless you're like these things that you're talking about, some really good examples. But I think that's the central point, is like, just because you're good at it doesn't mean that you have a true value proposition.
The thing is, there's two value propositions. There's one that's the customer facing value proposition. Why do I choose 1-800-GOT-JUNK? Well, they're convenient. There's this, that. The second one is the one for the Z, which is, why does that franchisee choose to be essentially a customer of the franchisor, yeah. 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And it's a totally different thing. And what you're saying is, like, there needs to be, because you're competing against not other junk removal companies, you're competing against one that hasn't been invented yet. Like, that's your call. They could just go, I'm going to do this on my own. So you have to make the case why you, potential franchisee, will make more money under our umbrella, even after you buy the franchise and you pay the royalties. Even after all that, you are net better off than you would be without us. And that is a very, very difficult question to answer. There's a lot that goes into that.
100%. And it's a lot more complex than this initial inkling to say, like, we are super successful in this market because of X, Y, and Z reason, therefore we can franchise this. Another really important point, I think, just to highlight one thing that Blair said, and this is totally my experience too. I've, like, prior to Breakthrough Academy, over a decade-long career in franchising, in contracting and home services. And the point that Blair made that I think is super important is that what you're talking about by franchising is you're saying we're now going to run two businesses off of this, like what was one, where you have to be able to operate a financially viable franchisor, and the franchisee has to have a totally viable business for all of them, right? And the question is like, is there an economic or financial model to fuel that, right?
Absolutely. I've seen people who've come to me and said, well, look at my financial statements and all the money I made. And I said, well, what if I took off 6% of your gross sales?
'Cause we
not
need
your
them for
profit,
royalties.
right? Because they're going to go to that. And what if I take off this cost and that cost? And then you look at it and you go, well, you yourself can't profitably run
Right.
one of your own franchises, right?
Right,
That's
right.
a fundamental problem.
Yeah, that's a big oversight.
That's a big oversight, right? So really, I think there's a misconception out there that it's easy, that every business can be franchised. That's not true. And that it is simply taking the business you have today and franchising. It's not. It's taking the concept that you've developed, figuring out how to move that concept into a business that can be franchised, and then looking internally and saying, do we have the people internally who can franchise and grow this business? It's all you're starting with, really. It's just a concept.
And to talk about the financial side of what you just mentioned there, like from a budget forecasting P&L perspective, those 6% royalties that the franchisee is paying, you need to run a really viable business on the franchisor side. And to run a serious franchisor, I mean, you would know better than I would, but you've got franchise marketing, you've got franchise salespeople, you've got initial franchise onboarding people, you've got long-term support people, you have a finance department, you have a group or commercial marketing, you might have a PR side, you've got HR. I mean, I could go on and on, but this is like tons of people, multiple departments, and all of this needs to be funded, right?
Yeah, I think that, again, one of the misconceptions I see a lot is people will come to me, and again, 3 weeks ago, I like to tell real stories. I got a call from a guy who operates a restaurant who said somebody came in and wants a franchise. And I said, well, stop. Are you planning to franchise a number of locations? No, I just want to grant a franchise to this one guy. I said, this should be the end of the call.
right.
Because you are wasting your time. Unless you're going to get up to enough revenue and income flow to pay the costs, not only of starting up, but supporting and having all these things, don't waste your time. You should have a target of a significant number of locations.
You mentioned 20 locations earlier. Are there any kind of like useful milestones or just a guide for someone is it 20? Is it 50? Does it depend on the industry?
It depends partly on the industry. I mean, I have a client who started franchising only 7 or 8 years ago. They're very successful now. They were economically successful at 10 for them, given what they have. Now they rely on outside expertise, me and a consultant a lot, because they don't have it internally, but they're willing to pay for it. But I always look at it and say, look, you should be looking generally terms of saying, I want to get to a place where I'm going to get significant revenue flows. And in my mind, my thought process, that's more than 10.
Yeah.
I like 20. And obviously you can get to a place where you say, look, if you're selling territories in Canada, depending how big they are, there's only so many.
Right.
Like you're stuck here.
Yeah.
Right.
30 some odd million people. Like that's
and 30 odd million people who live in a really small area, 90% of us.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, many brands that are selling, contractor services and things like that, when all of BC will have some in the Lower Mainland, we'll have 2 on the island, and maybe 2 up country. That's all of BC.
totally.
And Saskatchewan's worse.
You can't put in that many franchises in each franchise. And that's, I think, while we're on the topic of construction and contracting and home services, yes, there are some home service companies that do have high gross profit margins, but construction, for instance, isn't as high, right? So when you talk about so you can't have that many locations and you got to take a royalty from them, to the earlier point, you need that. It's not economically viable necessarily, right?
It can be a challenge because the question becomes, in some of these areas, there's not an ability for your franchisee to pass that 6% on to the consumer. Ultimately, if the consumer pays more, no problem. But if the consumer will not pay more, and we'll say, I'll go to independent Fred or independent Frida, you got a problem. And that's why you have to spend time saying, how are we different than the independents?
Yeah.
Listen, if you like that clip, you can watch the full episode by clicking here. If you're not yet subscribed, you probably should be, and you can do that by clicking right here.